an aspirant, a young seeker, a student, comes to the Buddha and he says, I'm suffering. Maybe it was somebody that died and he was grieving the loss. Maybe it was an illness or a sickness or an injury. Maybe it was just an accumulation of problems. There's many ways that we suffer and nobody escapes it. And so Buddha tells this story. Imagine a man walking through a forest and he's shot by an arrow and falls to the ground in great pain. There's nothing that he can do about that pain. He's been shot by an arrow. That hurts. But even if he pulls the arrow out and he continues to suffer the pain, what he does with that, or what she does with that pain, worries perhaps about, to continue the metaphor, whether the arrow is poison, or whether it'll cause an infection, or whether it indicates an attack that's going to be followed on by other people coming at him through the woods, whatever. And his pain is then compounded. And Buddha calls this the second arrow. The second arrow is the suffering that rises out of refusing to accept the pain, girding your loins, so to speak, resisting and pushing against it, rather than breathing and relaxing. I think you all know the secret to managing pain, whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, or mental pain, confusion, is to breathe and relax.
Beyond politics and above organized religion, a moral authority exists known globally as the Ageless Wisdom. It is the study of consciousness, the mystery of awareness, which cannot be measured yet will not be denied. This podcast from Michael Benner's Ageless Wisdom Salon features lessons in metaphysics, mysticism, and esoteric philosophy. Those who attend live on Zoom may also participate in group meditation and roundtable discussions. Register for our newsletter at michaelbenner.com. Welcome to the Ageless Wisdom Mystery School with
Michael Benner.
Well, first of all, let me thank each of you for being here. On Wednesday morning, I thought about going ahead with the Saturday class and not speaking to the election at all. My concern is always in a group about consciousness that when we start talking about politics, we get confused and dragged into a political discussion, which is so easy to do. We're so conditioned, mostly by media, to think in political terms. Many of us believe far too often. We think of our problems as something the government ought to solve at some level, federal, state, regional, county, local, whatever. Why doesn't somebody do something about this? So I want to assure you at the top that we're not going to talk about politics today. We're not going to talk about partisan policy. We're not going to talk about political solutions. We're not going to talk about building support for the Democratic Party or any third-party efforts. I have no interest in politics. My interest is in consciousness and the stress and the anxiety and the concern that we're all feeling as a result of the gut punch we got on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. I think a lot of us wonder, why did Donald Trump win this election? How could this possibly have happened? And then many others wonder, how could anybody lose to this guy, especially given the groundswell of support for Kamala. And even though she only had 100 days, she did a pretty good job, I thought, of raising our hopes and our aspirations that we could avoid what happened. But those are not the questions on my mind. The questions on my mind, and what I'd like to address with you today, is what are we going to do to regain our stability, our peace of mind, our happiness, and our empowerment. So I'd like to talk about the problem of negative emotions, of anger, of hatred, of fear, and the confusion that both supports that and rises out of it. Fear and confusion, or illusion, or I hesitate to use the word ignorance, but it's a damn good word. It's often used in Buddhism to refer to illusion or delusion, ignorance, or sometimes a Buddhist teacher would just call it stupidity. Ignorance and stupidity are really strong words. But it has a relationship with fear and anxiety and stress that is like a vicious cycle that I'd like us to consider at the top here before we do our opening meditation. A vicious cycle, a kind of a tornado, where feelings of fear and anxiety, which is how it feels not to understand. Fear, whether we call it anxiety or stress, or where it is on the spectrum from panic and horror and terror at one end to nervousness or mild apprehension on the other end, just a little concern, a little or a lot, it's all fear. And it has nothing to do with real danger. This is the cornerstone of my book, Fearless Intelligence, which I hope each of you have had an opportunity to read. That fear really has nothing to do with danger. It is not a signal of danger, although the mind goes there. What it is a feeling of not understanding whether a situation is dangerous or not. But the problem is it prepares us to fight or flight. You've heard fight or flight, freeze or faint. It prepares us for an external danger, and it hijacks the frontal lobes, the cerebral cortex, the executive functions of logic and reasoning, insight and understanding, at a time when we really need it. And so fear by any name creates more confusion, more ignorance, reinforces the illusions and delusions and the phantasms of fear, which is very stressful. It generates more fear. Now you know even less, which creates more ignorance and more fear and more ignorance and more fear and more ignorance and more fear. And it's a vicious cycle that we not only get trapped in, but pulled down by. And the way to get out of it is personal responsibility and meditation or contemplation, deep relaxation, meditation, to calm the disposition, to calm the mind, to calm and quiet the emotional nature, so that our ability to understand and to gain insight, great new ideas, a bigger picture, a gestalt, the whole enchilada here, is more likely to occur to us, to be recognized and understood as we relax, as we breathe, as we let go. I'm sure all of you are meditators to some extent, to some degree. And what better time than now to revisit a regular practice of meditation early in the morning. It's just essential, because the world is so crazy and getting crazier. What happened Tuesday is part of a global phenomena of incumbents getting thrown out and the whole political attitude shifting in democracies toward authoritarianism, autocracy, fascism, and military or paramilitary solutions by force, a search for power and control of other people rather than personal responsibility. But the way out of this actually is to take responsibility for your life and recognize the word response in responsibility. We can't control what's happening, but we can control, or manage is even a better word, our response. We have to be careful because we think of resisting, digging in our heels. I'm going to fight this. And yet, that's overstated. That's too much. We have to be careful about how we understand our response. What we resist persists. It's a holding on. It's a doubling down. It ensures that what you're holding on to is that vicious cycle of fear and confusion. Even if we feel aversion and we try to push something away, you have to reach out and touch it. You have to hold on to it to push it away. That's why we hold on to our pain, why we hold on to our grievances, our grief, and our suffering. We carry it with us, so-called emotional baggage, because letting go is difficult. Letting go of our attachments feels like letting go of control. And so one of the affirmations I want to offer you today is, I am in control of the letting go. To regain my awareness, to expand my awareness, to regain my vision of who I am and what I'm for, now more than ever. What am I here for? Now more than ever. What can I do? And I'll just say, whenever facing a problem, you ask yourself, or find yourself asking, what should I do? Make it a habit to say, wait a minute, I couldn't possibly know what to do if I don't know what I want. And I can't know what I want if I don't know what I believe. And I can't know what I believe or what I want or what to do unless and until I get a better sense of who I am. And right now I am angry. And I am hurt. And I'm afraid. And I don't know who to trust. And I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't know. There is the source of the fear. So the antidote is to know and understand. Know and understand what? The world, what Trump might do, what the right wing's going to do, what our alliance with Russia is going to look like. And that's largely what this is about. But again, I'm not going to get off into that. So I want to empower us today by reviewing, and the model I'm going to use, I could pull from a lot of different philosophies, and I will, but primarily I'm going to draw upon a model from Buddhism that refers to the three poisons. Those of you who are here regularly each Saturday might remember that we talked about the three poisons a couple of months ago. We really need to review them today. They begin with, well, there's really no beginning or end. I think you could begin and end with the first poison and the last poison, the root of it all, which is, again, ignorance, confusion, illusion, delusion. This is the source of the fear that underlies and supports the other two poisons, which are anger and hatred. That's the second poison. What do we do with our anger? Anger comes out of hurt and is supported by fear, again, the feeling of not knowing. And then the third poison, in no particular order, it's often called greed, but what it really is any desire or attachment. And both of these, anger, hatred, and our attachments and desires, the second and third poison, are rooted in this illusion that life is being done to us. There's a wonderful story I'll tell briefly before our meditation about the two arrows in Buddhism. The two arrows are an understanding that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. I remember the first time I saw that saying. It was in a calendar. I tore off a page and had, every day had a different saying, and I tore off the page, and there it was. I thought, what the hell does that mean? Pain is unavoidable, inevitable, but suffering is optional. And then I learned the story of the two arrows from Buddhism. It's an important story. An aspirant, a young seeker, a student, comes to the Buddha, and he says, I'm suffering. Maybe it was somebody that died, and he was grieving the loss. Maybe it was an illness or a sickness or an injury. Maybe it was just an accumulation of problems. There's many ways that we suffer, and nobody escapes it. And so Buddha tells this story. Imagine a man walking through a forest, and he's shot by an arrow and falls to the ground in great pain. There's nothing that he can do about that pain. He's been shot by an arrow. That hurts. But even if he pulls the arrow out and he continues to suffer the pain, what he does with that, or what she does with that pain, worries perhaps about, to continue the metaphor, whether the arrow is poison, or whether it'll cause an infection, or whether it indicates an attack that's going to be followed on by other people coming at him through the woods, whatever. And his pain is then compounded. And Buddha calls this the second arrow. The second arrow is the suffering that rises out of refusing to accept the pain, girding your loins, so to speak, resisting and pushing against it, rather than breathing and relaxing. I think you all know the secret to managing pain, whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, or mental pain, confusion, is to breathe and relax. Tension, resistance, increases our pain and causes suffering. And this is what Buddha calls the second arrow. So whether it's a personal situation in our lives or something huge and overwhelming, like the apparent embrace of fascism, the apparent embrace of racism, the apparent embrace by our neighbors, tens of millions of our neighbors, of sexism, an embrace of a person who is sworn to be a dictator on day one, to trash the Constitution, to shoot protesters, to deport 12 million people, to create concentration camps, to dismantle the government, to fire the deep state so-called civil servants, the professionals that really run the show and replace them with toadies. And on and on and on. You know all the threats. That's why you're here and why we're concerned. And yet we don't know how they're going to manifest, to what extent they're going to manifest, how much of it is just talk. We don't know. And there again is the fear that creates more confusion, more fear, more confusion. So let's avoid the second arrow by accepting the first arrow. It hurts to be here. It's scary. All right? But suffering is optional. The pain is inevitable in life. The first noble truth in Buddhism, life is suffering. Christ on the cross, he had all night. He could have got out of Dodge. He asked, can this cup be passed from me? Why do I have to go through that? Do I really need to do this? And he realized that he did. Why? To demonstrate that everybody suffers. The suffering is how we grow. Suffering, our problems and our heartache, these are not interruptions of a life that ought to be totally happy and full of, the rose garden, so to speak. Our problems and our heartache are part of life. They're deliberate, intentional, so as to grow. It's adversity that helps us grow. It's like birthing. What we're doing is birthing higher consciousness in America. And people need to see the horror of what they've wrought. I heard a story this morning, I don't know yet how true it is, that Google searches for, can I change my vote, are through the roof. That says two things to me, that people are already recognizing the mistake that they made, and secondly, you've got to be pretty ill-informed or poorly informed or unaware to think you might be able to change your vote. So there's sort of good news and bad news rolled into that. One thing we must avoid doing, let me say it this way, is making enemies out of the people who voted for Trump. They are not our enemy. And I'll talk more about understanding why people would vote for Trump, why they did vote for Trump, why they voted with their middle finger, basically. And it's less about forgiving or ignoring the fact that maybe there's people in your family who are diehard Trumpers and tell you how much they like this guy because he's a disruptor. They think things need to be disrupted. And they just sort of overlook the fact that he's an adjudicated rapist, a certified racist, a thief, a con man, and a sadist, as well as a narcissist. These are not names. I'm not name calling here. It's just established psychology. We're beings of love and light. We're spiritual creatures. We're not human beings with a spiritual nature. We're spiritual beings in form for a reason, to grow and evolve and to contribute to the world. What we have here is an opportunity to double down and say, yeah, the stuff that keeps me busy, earning and spending and producing and consuming and paying my bills and fixing all the stuff that breaks, and repairing what can't, replacing what can't be repaired, and, it's always something, is not the centerpiece of my life. The centerpiece of my life is discovering and developing who I am and what I'm for. We are consciousness. We are awareness. We are the container of thoughts and feelings and behavior and perception of the world, all of which changes. The container, the awareness, doesn't change. It doesn't grow. It's infinite and eternal. The spiritual ground of being, the truth of who we are, is awareness, consciousness. In monotheism, it's called love. It's the understanding that separation is an illusion, that the whole physical world is energy. It's a play. It's a psychodrama. If you're scientifically oriented, or if you remember your school, you know what appears to be solid matter is mostly empty space with a few tiny, tiny little quantum particles spinning around madly. And if you break those down, you get nothing but energy. Consciousness is an energy that cannot be created, cannot be destroyed, but everything else is impermanent. Your thoughts are impermanent. They don't last. They're always changing. They often fight with each other and argue in your own head. I want this. No, I don't. I'd like to do this. I'd rather do that. I want the red one. No, maybe the blue one. You're not your thoughts. They're always changing. Feelings don't last. They're impermanent. None of your physical stuff, I like my physical stuff. I like my gadgets and doodads and my technology, but they rust. They're only good for a few years. Then, like everything else, they go to the junk heap. What lasts? If you can't take that with you, what can you take with you? Awareness. That's the truth of who we are. So, in difficult times like these, in terrifying times like these, in times when I'm filled with anger and even hatred, I'll cop to it. I don't like it, but I feel it. Or let's just call it frustration with stupid people, contempt. I don't like that either. I'd like to touch on what to do about that. Use it as an opportunity to understand yourself. Every time, this is my suggestion to you, this is my appeal to you, every time you find yourself obsessing on that person you know who's a MAGA supporter, who wants to own the libs, who revels in Trump's mean, cruel nastiness, and people who get giddy and excited at that kind of disruption, instead of obsessing on how could they be that way, why would they be that way, turn within. And it takes one to know one. It's sort of a high metaphysical principle. Find the shadows in you as I find the shadows in me, that recognizes that is tempted to counter that with similar behavior. Like that Pogo statement, I've seen the enemy, it's us. We live in a house of mirrors. Know thyself. That's my big message to us today. Now, the antidote to anger and hatred is not easy to do, but is very powerful and essential. And that's compassion. Compassion can be defined a number of ways, but I guess I'll describe it as recognizing that everybody suffers. This, in the Christian tradition, is love your enemy, which I dare say most Christians do not understand. They may accept that as part of the doctrine, but they don't live it, they don't understand it. And we have priests and ministers that go out and bless the guns and bless the battleships and appeal to our sense of divinity, to God, to choose one side over the other. Hell, we do that in football games. Friday night, high school football. The kids are out there praying to God to support their team. It's sort of ridiculous, this idea that you could petition God to win a football game. But it sort of speaks to how primitive our understanding of such things really is. It's not the world that we want to change so that we can benefit. It's ourselves that we want to redeem, to grow, to improve upon, and then give that to the world. Life is a gift that's been given to us to give to others through service, through understanding, if nothing else. And compassion is understanding that your enemy is suffering. Why is he or she your enemy? Is there anything that you have done or that you were doing to provoke their fear and suffering that maybe you could stop doing somehow, so that they don't feel so frightened, so afraid, so angry? But these emotions, the reason poison is such a good word for it, they're so contagious that when we're confronted with an angry, hateful person, what does it bring out of us? Love and compassion? No, it brings out anger and hatred. It takes consciousness, awareness, to say, no, I'm not going with that animal nature. I'm not going with that limbic brain that is survival-oriented. I'm going to shift into these frontal lobes, the executive function of the higher brain, and redeem myself in the moment and look upon them with understanding, with compassion, knowing that they suffer. But to understand others and to recognize their suffering, we must first understand ourselves, see it in ourselves. Otherwise, you're not going to recognize it. If you look at emotional intelligence, the way it was laid out by Daniel Goleman, there's 4 pillars or keys to emotional intelligence. And the first 2 are intrapersonal, and the second 2, 3 and 4, are interpersonal. And that's the right order. The first 2 pillars are self-awareness and personal responsibility for managing your emotions, replacing negativity with positivity, responding to fear and anxiety, anger and hatred, with some breathing, some relaxation, some letting go. This is why we meditate, to practice. And then the 3rd and 4th pillars or keys are empathy and social awareness, which you could think of as leadership or relationship management. So you can't do anything for other people. You can't change their minds. You can't win the argument. You can't prove your point. You can't even begin to understand them if you don't understand yourself well enough to recognize through empathy and compassion what they're going through and approach them that way. Because we just do what most people do and reflect that anger back at them and reflect that hatred back at them, then it just spirals down, that vicious cycle. It just gets worse and worse and worse. And then we're tempted to just end those relationships. And yeah, I guess we all have people in our lives, hopefully few in number, but I doubt there's anybody that doesn't have someone in their lives that loves the idea of replacing democracy and liberty and freedom with an oligarch-based fascism. That's what they're looking for. They want that power and control. They're terrified of liberals. They're terrified of what they don't know, what they don't understand. Remember, that's what fear is. So if you're a white person in Iowa and you're never exposed to people of color, you don't know anything about them, they appear different. When the differences are nothing that really matters, but they don't know that. It's largely unconscious. And as long as you avoid politics, you can go to Iowa or Michigan or Pennsylvania or any of these swing states that went for Trump and have a perfectly enjoyable time. You break bread with these people and talk about the ball game and get along just fine as long as you don't turn to politics or religion. That's the old thing. When I started in radio, they said, Michael, you can, on your talk show, you can you can talk about anything you want except religion and politics. And I said, are you kidding? Those are the two most important subjects. That's exactly what I want to talk about. But not arguing, questioning. I'll talk a little about questions. But let me talk about the nature of questions themselves. Do not underestimate the power of questioning. One thing I've learned as a student of metaphysics and philosophy in general is that many things, many things, do not have clear answers. But that doesn't mean you stop questioning. Even if you don't get an answer, there's benefit in asking the question. You move closer. You see more of the sky, so to speak, but you may never resolve it and get a definitive answer. But all the more reason to ask more questions and better questions and continue the questioning. And when I see people argue, few have the awareness, the self-awareness they need to ask a question and then actually listen to the answer. There's not a lot of listening in arguing, is there? And yet, there's enormous power in that. So I think that's my little sense, that's my understanding of why, especially when emotionally amped up, people don't like to question because it feels like they're turning the floor over to the other person. They're giving their power to the other person to respond, and now I got to sit here and listen to their diatribe, and I already know they're wrong. I'd rather use the opportunity to speak and tell them why they're wrong and why I'm right. And people in authority do not like to be questioned. I'm sure you've noticed. As little kids, our parents did not allow us to question them. School teachers, boy, I got in big trouble in school for daring to question a teacher. You should be able to ask questions of someone who's trying to teach you. And sometimes you were able to do that as a student, but if it ever came to questioning their authority or the power they have over you, wow, then you're in trouble. Try questioning a cop or a judge. They freak out. You got to be very careful about how that's done. There's rules in the criminal justice system for how you question. You have to walk on eggshells. Questions are exceedingly powerful things. Or even to reframe the whole concept and call it wondering. How is life going to be filled with wonder? How is life going to be wonderful if we don't wonder? If we don't continually challenge what we know as incomplete? Maybe it's not wrong, maybe it's just incomplete. Have you ever recognized how many arguments you have with people where you are locked into this right or wrong mindset when in fact they're not wrong? They're just incomplete. Their understanding doesn't include what you understand. And maybe, just maybe, you don't understand some of what they understand. And you could both benefit from understanding each other. But again, we have to understand ourselves before we can put ourselves in that humble place of wanting to understand, of wanting to question. Okay? We don't have to make our neighbors into enemies. They're not bad or wrong. Yes, every diehard racist in America voted for Trump. But all the people that voted for Trump are not racists. And we got to be careful of that either-or mindset. You've heard me talk about that for years, so I won't go on about that. So this poison that is anger and hatred has an antidote. And it's compassion. It's recognizing that others suffer and asking yourself and maybe even asking them in very clever, loving, kind ways about their concerns. What are they afraid of? What are their concerns? All right? And make your goal understanding, not proving a point, not making them wrong, not fixing their confusion. Our primary goal, I would suggest, is to understand ourselves better, grow ourselves better, that we may enhance our contribution to the world, not by covering the world with leather, but by wearing shoes, not by changing the world so that we benefit, but changing, growing, elevating ourselves so that the world benefits. The other two poisons, illusion or ignorance, and attachments or desire, I'm going to sidestep for today. They're part of the larger package, but the poison that is anger and hatred and the antidote that is compassion is the central part of my message.